special edition of Front Row Late. I'm talking to author, critic, broadcaster and rogue, Clive James. After moving to Britain from Australia in the 1960s, James soon established himself in the press and on TV as a caustic and charismatic commentator on popular culture and a pioneer of television criticism. He was one of the most famous faces on British TV, interviewing and hanging out with some of the biggest stars of the day. And he's gone on to write captivating and hilarious memoirs and to become a major league poet and translator. A diagnosis of leukemia in 2010 may have slowed down James's productivity, but it hasn't stopped him. Kept alive by pioneering treatment, he's chronicled his illness in insightful columns for The Guardian and produced powerful poetry exploring mortality and the many joys of life. Now aged 79, he's lived longer than he or his doctors predicted, and this year he surprised many by publishing another book. The River in the Sky takes the form of an epic poem over 120 pages, which reflects on the fragile treasures of his life. And James, mischievous as ever, invited me round to his den in Cambridge to talk about it.
All is not lost, despite the quietness that comes like nightfall now, as the last strength ebbs from my limbs, and feebleness of breath makes even focusing my eyes a task. But no complaints, simply because enforced, this pause is valuable. Few people read poetry anymore, but I still wish to write its seedlings down, if only for the lull of gathering, no less a harvest season for being the last time.
Clive, I've got your book, your new poem, in my hand, and it's all scrawled over. But I want to start simple. All is not lost is the first line.
Well, all is not lost is a bit of a threat, isn't it? Because I'm really saying it's not over yet. You thought it might be, but it's not. I'm still at it. And that's actually what drives it. It's a feeling that I've got something still to say. That's it. It's life itself and how to say farewell. Because although I may not look at this very moment because I'm full of buzz and fizz because you're here, the truth is that I haven't got all that much life left, but I want to use it saying a proper goodbye.
It is, in some ways, a kind of elegiac reflection on what the interface between life and death means, and how you can find cultural forms in which to talk about that.
Yes.
And it was really striking that you didn't so much go back to the classical world, though you do that a bit. You went back to Egypt. There's one point where you say, look, actually, everything we've already thought always has started in Egypt. Now, I haven't spotted Egypt in your work before, so I wondered where it came from.
I like the enigma of Egypt. And when you think about it, Egypt shouldn't be there. We only found out about it quite recently. It was something that happened, dare I say it, before your time, because you're mainly Romans and stuff. I don't think even the Romans were absolutely certain about Egypt. But I just like the idea of preparing yourself for the voyage to nowhere, because that's roughly what I'm doing now. But I want to register the fact that, first of all, I've had a blessed life, and second, there's something blessed about the whole process of moving on. Now, that's the rare bit. As epics go, this is A, very short, it's a small epic, B, it's remarkably happy. It's content with the exit from life. And I like to think that's my contribution.
In some ways, it kind of explores that sense of life ending.
Yes.
Through the model of all those cultural moments that people remember collapsing and mixing up. What's so exciting is that you can compare Egypt, with Auschwitz.
Modern history, especially, is in the poem a lot, and especially the bits of modern history that are very, very hard to take, like the concentration camps and so on. It's all in there because it wasn't that I was there, but I was alive at the time. And there's a constant reminder in the poem, look, I was there, I was around.
Your generation, and you in particular, you grew up in this wonderful mixture of what we might call high and popular culture. So,
Yes.
1 minute, in the poem, you're sitting there watching the diving at the Rio Olympics. The next minute we're with Camus. The next minute we're with some intellectual I have to Google to find out about. And then you're with your granddaughter.
Stick around, Mary, because that's exactly what it's about. It's about that mixture of, well, I won't say the unrespectable and the respectable. I would say of the cultural and all the stuff that is cultural too, but it's not called that. Like the high divers are in it, the circus, everything that people do. It's a carnival, and I always thought life was a carnival. There's one thing I got right when I was a kid. I found it all interesting. In other words, I didn't pay attention in school. And I'm still
not paying attention.
I'm still not doing it. I got all my interests into the one spot. That always was my subject. As a writer, the stuff that doesn't matter matters too. Yeah, that's my subject.
But it's also about how you cite your own autobiography. I mean, it's back to your dad and your mum and your wife and your children. And so you feel that this is really kind of, there's a weave.
Everything is pertinent. And the business about my father, for example, he's in the poem several times, but that's the only place he is, because I can't remember seeing him. I saw him for about 10 minutes when I was tiny. So it's really coming to terms with an absence in the household.
Your father was killed on the way back?
He was killed on the way back from Japan. He was a prisoner of war in Japan, and he got killed on the flight home. It was just one of those things. But of course, if you're a kid, it's 10 of those things. It's everything. And it shaped my life, really, seeing what it did to my mother. So my personal story is in there too. But the idea is that everybody's personal story is in here. This is an era. This is my poem of an era, which is my era, which is now coming to an end.
You say few people read poetry anymore.
I'm poking a stick at my publishers. I should have written an extra line, except of course for mine. One hopes to be read, but you've got to write on the assumption that people don't care much about poetry. I think the answer is to make the poetry look like something else. But I think there's a hope for poetry as long as you get your attention off the question of whether poetry has a future. Poetry has always had a future. We're talking about it now. It's in the future now.
And you did have a huge success with this previous collection, Sentenced to Life, because partly it's poems in short bites, isn't it?
I prefer to say that I got lucky, but yes, that's a key question, is whether the short poem is the only way to go. And theoretically, I think that, but then, God help me, I found myself writing an epic.
Yeah.
So I thought I'd better make this epic short, which it is for an epic. But there were things that didn't fit into the format of a short poem that I wanted, nevertheless, to write anyway. So it accumulated. It turned into this book, and I don't think that was a mistake. What's a possible mistake is saying as you go in, this is a big thing. It's not really. It's something I wrote naturally, And if it isn't enjoyable, then it's dead. And so am I. There's the gag. At last, a joke.
You've written a huge amount since you got terminally ill. I mean, that's what...
Big question.
That is what... You know, if everybody thinks Clive James, they think the guy is writing all this stuff.
I recommend imminent death for any writer. It concentrates the mind wonderfully. And here's the big thing. You're not doing anything else. I'm sitting here, I'm either reading or writing, getting ready to write. What else am I going to do? I'm not going to go out and ride my bike. And so it's good for the concentration. And there's a lot to think about. There's a life to think about. And I'm very grateful to have had one.
When you write, are you doing it on this table? I mean, what's the...
Yeah, this is it. Yeah. In fact, it's remarkably clean, actually, because your wonderful people here have swept it, or swept the contents onto the floor. In fact, it's easily heaped up with stuff. Yeah, this is where I do it.
At all, you know, at all hours of the day and night? And you sleep?
My family build it for me, and they're in here every 10 minutes to check up, make sure I haven't died. They want to be the first to know.
What's really pleasurable is the kind of, you know, the naughtiness of it, the roguishness of it. You know,
I'm rolling my eyes here.
Oh, come on.
You sure?
The bit, you know, the bit that I'm bound to love. I'm going to read it to you. It's about how awful ancient Greece must have looked when it was all painted. You know, and you say, thank God and every other god there is that time is an aesthete who strips the colours from the path.
You have to believe me that I actually aimed this bit right at you, because I suspected from watching your programs that you felt the same. that you found ancient Greece, or ancient anything, just a bit overpainted. It actually benefits from a bit of weathering, doesn't it?
It jolly well does, you know. It beats the polychromatic crap out of the Disneyland that antiquity once was.
Antiquity was Disneyland, there's no question of it.
Before too long, that is being set in one of my exam papers.
Go ahead.
It is going to provoke these kids.
I think it's true.
It's true.
And
I have to say it's true.
If you saw the past the way in its original condition, you'd be stunned at the vulgarity.
Yeah. As a reader, you get constantly rewarded by naughty bits in this. You know, naughty bits of kind of different types.
Say it again, it's not going to hurt me. It's full of sex.
It's full of sex. It's full of surprises about sex.
Yes.
And full of the unexpected. And you get that kind of sense of the real playground of the elderly poet.
Love, desire, renewal. You don't escape them. You don't get out of it just by growing old.
And in a way, you get better at writing about it when you are.
You get better at thinking about it. I'm not so sure about the thing itself, but you do get better at thinking about it, getting it in perspective.
Do you think it's a difficult poem?
So a lot of people who, I think they've been shortchanged and have come out of schooling afraid of poetry, and they shouldn't be, and certainly not made afraid by this. I don't think it's even tricky. I think the themes are up front. It's as simple as ABC. I think poetry should have another chance on that level. I think the wrong turning happened when it was especially the guys. It was Eliot and Pound. I thought, well, hardly anybody's reading it, so let's go obscure. I think that was an error. But you've got to take all the risks of trying to be popular. For one is the biggest risk, you might fail. What if they don't buy it?
What poems do you read? What poets do you read?
I read them all, or I did. There I'm feeling my lack of strength. I've just discovered a wonderful American poet called Gertrude Schnackenberg. She's really called that. And I wish I had time to catch up with everything she's done. I think she's brilliant. And the reason I took so long to discover is the time has gone when I could read everybody. I can't keep up.
It's very clear when you read this poem that it's written really from, I imagine, this room. We go everywhere in the world, and yet we always come back to. We partly come back to family, but we also come back to a sense of Cambridge and the place that you have, in a kind of way, made your home.
Well, I won't be leaving here now. And so it's a poem about that, because it's about a poem about all the travelling I did. I went everywhere at one stage. But the day comes when you get stuck at home and you have to reflect on it. I'm very, very grateful for my life of travel and seeing things. But in this poem, I try and concentrate it all in what will remain. This is what remains of us.
Yeah. There's a lot left out, though, inevitably.
Yes, that's true. Most of my private life is left out, thank God. We won't go into detail, but yes, that's necessarily so, I think. You think I was some kind of hero saint when you read this poem?
Not quite.
If I ever danced again, it would be with you on the smooth boards of this kitchen. Shall we try it soon? Worst that can happen is I trip over my feet, you're trapped below my body, and the Daily Mail reporter gets here before the police. It could be a fun scene, but alas, my legs are heavier than a hulking god's at Karnak, and I can barely stumble.
There's not so much of the kind of Clive James, the TV star, you know, that side of James. Are we going to hear more of that?
It had better be soon. That's all I could say about that. And
you've been saying that for a long time.
No, I probably won't get round to telling the rest of the story, as it were. The rest of the story is in here. I haven't really got much common sense by nature, but I've got to be sensible. I can't go on like this forever, although sometimes it feels like one can.
In the 1980s and 90s, James was one of the most popular and highest paid personalities on British TV. He was in with some of the biggest names in show business, from Mel Brooks to Frank Sinatra, and was granted an audience with some of the most famous and intriguing characters of the day.
You ever ride the subway?
I actually do sometime, and it usually if I go for tennis matches, or if I go, for example, to Madison Square Garden. I know that I was caught in incredible storm, and all of my friends were struggling in their limousines to get there. I took the subway. It was the best and fastest and safest way to get there. So you have to use your judgment.
In his London weekend television series, Clive James on Television, he turned a wry eye on amusing and bizarre TV and odd cultural exports from around the world. And it was watched by millions each week.
But there can't be any doubt that the toughest marketing job of all on the international airwaves would fall to the Swedes, were they ever to try and break into the English-speaking market with this long-established brand of local toilet paper.
And in his series Saturday Night Clive, he teased out surprising revelations from some famous and infamous faces.
Mrs. Marcos, the whole world is fascinated with your shoes. Was it really necessary to have 3,500 pairs?
Well, first of all, I would like to say that when you open anybody's closet, you find shoes. Thanks God, in this closet, they found shoes and not skeletons.
In his heyday, he also hobnobbed with royalty, even lunching with Princess Di.
Clive James is a royalist, all right. It always was. And my mother would not have tolerated my being anything else.
And you've been, you were famously friends with Princess Diana.
Well, that's different.
That's
different.
not royalist.
There isn't a man alive who met Diana who wasn't crazy about her. Mind you, she's enough to drive anyone crazy in many ways. But it's another story, definitely.
You've been very ill for a long time, and somehow that has made your frailty, your interface between life and death, very much kind of part of public property.
Oh, yes. I've been shameless about it.
Yeah.
If that's the way you want to put it.
No, No, I think shamelessness isn't the issue. It's about somehow it's performative.
Yes. Well, I'm a performer.
Yeah.
I'm stuck with that. Look at me. I'm over here. I'm dying. it's a performer's attitude.
And for the next show, I'm dying again. Still. Yeah.
Tune in next week. I'll still be dying.
I thought there was something ironic, if I've got it right, that when you wrote Sentence to Life, and there's the poem here that became hugely famous.
Japanese maple went viral, yes.
Absolutely. And, basically the idea was you've got this tree in your garden that you're looking at. Claire Wynne chose it, your daughter chose it. And somehow it's there and it's going to outlive you,
Okay, now ask me what happened to the tree.
That's what I want to know. What happened to the tree?
It died.
And you didn't.
Why am I laughing? It died and I didn't. So take that, tree.
That is real Clive James roguery. Everybody else buys a tree, plants it, says it's going to outlive me and one day it's going to be whatever.
There's a story behind that poem, which I can tell very briefly. I got lucky. I think it's a good poem too, but then I think everything I've written is good. But I got lucky because the New Yorker had its paywall down that week.
So it was in the New Yorker and
For nothing.
For nothing.
So people like Mia Farrow logged onto it, said, hey, what a poem. And so I got lucky. I'm just talking myself down. Let's tell the terrible truth about being a writer. We think everything we do is good. We better think that or you won't do it.
See,
it's basic equipment.
Do you think that's, if you were to say, what have I written that, now I think I could have done
I've got a list of 20 books that I wouldn't have done, but I'm not telling you. Because you'll be up all night throwing them out the window. There are things I shouldn't have written. There are things I could have written better. But on the whole, I have no complaints. It would be very bad manners to complain.
I'm interested in how you write and you say, okay, I'm not implying that you weren't sure there was going to be another book, but you're sitting here.
I know
what
one
are you doing?
book I'm going to do.
Right, come on, tell us about it.
Because it's contracted for and it's practically in the bookshops. It's just I haven't written it yet. It's the last volume of my memoirs. But I've got a problem. How does it end? I was throwing various endings, sort of trailing off, ...
Been done before that.
It's been done, yeah. I'm working on it. I'm very keen on my memoirs books.
Yeah.
They're a pack of lies, but they're true lies. And I started writing the memoirs sequence back in 1979, which seems to be a long time ago now. It is. And they've done well, and there's The Secret of My Fortunes. So I owe my publishers to bring that to a conclusion. So I'll do that. But beyond that, I can't be sure of getting much more done. But that's what I thought 10 years ago.
Yeah, that's what you said 10 years ago.
Well, yeah, well, the chemists, the doctors, the pharmacologists, God bless them, were working on some brilliant new stuff. And one of the things they were working on was the leukemia drug, the anti-leukemia drug, which is really a holding mechanism. It's not going to cure you of leukemia, but it holds it off, gives you more time.
Yeah.
The problem here, the paradox, the problem, is nobody knows how much time. Nobody. So I'm actually experimental case. I think I'm case number 340 or something.
But there's something slightly odd in this, isn't it? Because the standard story about people and their allotted span is that he's gone too quick, and he's gone before we expected. I thought he'd live for another 10 years, and he's only lived for 6 months.
It is new.
And this is a completely
Time to reflect. That's new.
Yeah. I mean, it struck me that you'd had kind of time to see time that you would never have expected to see.
My favourite painters, like Titian is one, and Rembrandt was another. They had an old age, or anyway, they painted it.
And exaggerated it in Titian's case.
But on the whole, it's quite a new phenomenon. Everybody lives to be old.
Yeah. You must, look at what's the kind of things that are happening in the world and in politics and whatever that you just never thought you would.
A lot of it scares the hell out of me, but the thing that scares me most is the idea that the whole population of the world's poor can come to the rich countries, because in all justice they should, but in fact it's going to be impossible and impossibly difficult. I'm kind of feel a bit cowardly that I'll be missing out on all that, because every question is going to be raised. We're getting into deep territory here, but maybe we should.
But you're a migrant, you're an Australian migrant.
Yes.
And you've got two places to call home.
Yes, although I'll never see Australia again, but incidentally I would if I could. I miss Australia, I always have. And see, before I got ill, it's a story I very rarely tell, because you can't say, look how much I travelled, look how rich I was. But the fact was that, especially when I was working hard in Fleet Street and on TV, I was back in Australia half a dozen times a year. Several times I went out there for lunch. It's not that I lost contact with Australia, but those days, after I got sick, those days were over. And I had to reconcile myself to the fact that I wouldn't get back. But Britain is home enough.
And Cambridge is home more than London is
Cambridge,
home?
I think, I've always thought was heaven. I've been writing about Cambridge as in its role as heaven for many years. Sometimes my family takes me out for a ride in my wheelchair, my granddaughter pushing.
But I think that what you get out of living in this town is something of a kind of adversity to it.
Just the other me.
Yeah.
I'm a contemplative chap, but I'm just disguised as a clowning, dancing, capering, professional idiot. But the truth is, I'm the unknown scholar.
I mean, you've talked about the young Clive James, the television and the instant recognisability and, the money and the cars and all the rest. When you look back at that, what does the old Clive James think about it?
The old Clive James disapproves of the new Clive James, this one, disapproves heavily of the old Clive James. If this program gets shown in Australia, which it will, everything eventually gets shown in Australia, it will be noted that at this point I took the opportunity to mention the word larrikin, because Australians know what a larrikin is, but nobody in Britain has ever known. The larrikin
is the kind of blokish, wide boy, funny,
yeah, that's getting it.
Rogue.
I write like a larrikin. The larrikin may choose to be dignified, but he has to work at it.